Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us again today, and welcome to another episode at amazic.com where we talk about Kubernetes, cloud native, and everything related. We talk to people from the smallest startups that have just started recently to the largest enterprises, but all of them really coming together around one thing, and that's cloud native. Um, I'm Twain Taylor, editor at Amazic. And if you like what you hear here, I want to encourage you to head over to amazic.com and check out the other interviews that we have like this, and check out all of the other stuff that we do as well. There's some pretty cool stuff happening there. And with that said, I want to introduce our guest for today. We have with us Shon Harris, who is the developer relations lead at Spot by NetApp. So Spot was acquired by NetApp a couple of years ago, and yeah, and so Shon, he has the developer relations, and it's great to have you with us, Shon. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, and thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure.
All right, Shon. So we're going to talk about some of the cool things that Spot is doing in the space related to Kubernetes, cloud native, and just cloud. But before that, to get us started, I want to just get to know you a bit, and have you tell us a bit about your journey up to Spot.
Yeah, I've been in the IT industry since 1999.
Mhm.
Um, I started out doing inbound customer technical support for HP LaserJet printers. Um,
Wow.
really found, yeah, that's how old I am. Really found my way to wanting to work on the networking side and work in IT. That's really where I started out as a computer science student and realized I didn't want to program and do the traditional computer science. I really wanted to be on the network and operations side of the house. And so that's really where
Mhm.
I've tailored my career. I've
Mhm.
been IT director, IT manager at a couple different places. And about in 2015, I could see that the cloud was really making a pivot point towards being the new thing that I needed to know. It was no
Mhm.
longer about how I was managing server rooms and the operations of these on-prem companies. It was all going to be about how we work in the cloud and how we use that technology to
Mhm.
transform our businesses. And so since 2015, excuse me, I've been a working in the cloud as a cloud practitioner, as a DevOps team lead, as a guy that goes in and helps institute or implement the principles and the best practices behind DevOps and platform engineering. And then in September of 2022, so September of last year, I joined Spot. Um, got tired of being on call. Got tired of being the guy that had to fix everything all the time. So got a little bit of a work-life balance, but I still get to play with the cool tech, and I still get to explore and be and work in a space that I'm passionate about. So I've been here for about 6 months, and so I'm the first DevRel dev advocacy lead that Spot has had, and so I'm helping to start build out that program.
Mhm. Wow, really interesting. From printers to IT and networking to DevOps, now cloud native. Sounds like quite a journey, and seems like you covered both sides, the hardware and the software side of uh, just IT and cloud. That's really interesting. That's a great
And
mix.
I think that's one of the things that makes this such a cool role is I get to play with both, right? I still get to play with the traditional infrastructure. It might be infrastructure as code, but I'm still solving the same problems that I was back in 2005, 2006, before the cloud really took off. But just approaching it in a different way. And so I think that's one of the things that makes working at Spot really fun.
Yeah, and some of the principles really stay the same over time.
Hmm.
They just change in their packaging. And
For
related to
sure.
that, I want to just talk about, before we get into talking about the nitty-gritty stuff, I want to just take, 30,000 foot view and talk about kind of the top challenges or the opportunities that you see in the industry right now, especially related to Kubernetes. And, yeah, and just what are some of the underlying principles that you see? Some of the what's the pulse of the industry as you see it?
For
What's
sure.
happening out there?
Yeah, for sure. So I think one thing that I'm really noticing as we run into the post-pandemic world and the economic uncertainty that we've seen over the last 12, 18 months, One of the biggest challenges and one of the biggest opportunities, frankly, is how do you deal with the scope of what the cloud is becoming? I think the cloud has become a ubiquitous word that we like to throw things at and kind of loop into the cloud. But I think from a FinOps, cloud ops, platform engineering strategy, I think the biggest ones that I see and hear about a lot are security. How do you protect the data that you have in the cloud? And then how do you make it so that it's financially feasible? We're starting to see an uptick in noise about companies that are looking at repatriating their data from the cloud just because of
Right.
cost, right? Because they've never gotten that cost under control. And cost is a huge, huge part of any IT operations. But I think that there's a lot of chatter that's going on about, hey, we should think about repatriating our data back from the cloud. How would we do that? How does it make sense? How do we get our costs under control? How do we deal with these cuts to our budgets that we have?
Mhm.
And then I think, how do we secure it, right? We're seeing companies that are laying off percentages of their workforce. And that
Mhm.
percentage isn't really going down from a level of work standpoint. It's increasing the remaining the workload on the remaining staff. So I
Mhm.
think one of the things is as a vendor is we need to come in with the best solutions to help alleviate some of those problems,
Mhm.
because it is a real concern. And then I think the third one is governance. What is going to happen with data governance, not only in the United States but worldwide? What are the implications of GDPR as GDPR evolves? What is the complexity that's going to be required as the states in the United States start looking at how do we manage data privacy? How do we ensure that our data is kept not only secure, but kept away from people that we don't want? You're starting to see a real build of that. And what worries me is a patchwork solution of 50 different states coming up with 50 different solutions instead of one well thought out framework approach. And we can talk about which way is the right way to do it, but I think you ask about what are the challenges and opportunities. Those are my big three. How do we operate? How do we manage security? And how do we control our cost and the data that we have in the cloud? Because those three things are why people move to the cloud.
Really interesting. I wanted to dig in a bit more into point two, which you're talking about cloud repatriation. And it's
Mhm.
something that doesn't get talked about too much, I think, enough at least. And I
Mhm.
just wanted you to just give us a little bit more on that idea from what you see out there. What kind of organizations do you see, where cloud repatriation is big on their agenda? And what's the need that's really, sparking this? Where is it coming from in these organizations? What do you see out there?
Right. And so we've seen the companies that are looking at repatriating some or all of their cloud operations, or at least put it on their radar to review, looking at
Mhm.
it from two things. How do we manage the infrastructure, and what is the cost to manage that infrastructure? Too many companies, when they moved to the cloud, just did a straight lift and shift of their cloud operations or their
Mhm.
on-prem operations to the cloud. So they took a big forklift and they took all the servers that they had in their on-prem server rooms or their on-prem data centers and took a forklift and stuck it in whatever cloud vendor made sense at the time. And just because AWS is the leader, AWS is where it all landed. And
Mhm.
AWS was like, yep, we'll take it all. We will take everything you can throw at us and they will charge a premium for it. If you don't structure a migration correctly or kind of really think out the initial aspect of onboarding to a cloud service provider, I think you miss a lot because you try to take the same approach that you have where I've got a server, it's running application A. I need that same server size and all that iron running full time in an environment that is just in the cloud. And so instead of having that iron in my server room, I'm just now it's server as code and I'm paying for it. But what we don't talk about when you talk about repatriating your data back is what have you done with that data center? Have you shut it down? Have you turned it into an office? Have you expanded? Right? Who's going to pay for the cooling? How are you going to rebuild all this infrastructure that you yanked out when you moved to the cloud? Because hey, we didn't need servers anymore. So now you've got, and so you're looking at middle-sized companies, and the Basecamp one is the one that everybody's been talking about lately, where the parent company of the Basecamp product said, "Hey, we can save a couple $1 million over a couple of years to repatriate our data back in. And yeah, sure, you can. But does that make sense for every company? But you start, one of the challenges that I think that we have in the cloud computing space is we talk about it from a holistic one size fits all approach. The same EC2 instances that works for a large company will work for a small company and we'll all get saved. That's not really true. And I think that when we look at the idea of repatriating software and cloud operations back to the on-prem environment, there's a lot of things that we forget that, or that we've chosen to forget that we need to work with and really think about before we start moving those servers back, because there's a lot of infrastructure risk that these cloud service providers bring that help reduce that risk from a compliance and a GRC standpoint.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you mentioned about that these organizations have really toned down their old school infrastructure, moved to the cloud, and now they need to figure out are they going to rebuild that? What has changed now that they want to bring all of the infrastructure, the data back in-house, back on premise? What's changed, especially in the world of Kubernetes?
Mhm.
I think there are challenges related to how do you run these Kubernetes powered apps on premise, which itself is a big challenge because Kubernetes is very cloud native friendly.
For sure.
Any thoughts on that? What are some of these challenges? Just a little bit more into this this idea
Yeah.
of cloud repatriation. Yeah.
So I think that there are two challenges. Number one is the one that you bring up. Kubernetes was built in the cloud for the cloud and scaled for the cloud, right? And so building out a new Kubernetes cluster, building out all your workflows, building out all of your infrastructure demands that you're using for your serverless journey is going to be a big one. And I think the other thing that we don't think about is a lot of the compliance standards, SOC 2, ISO, all of your GRC standards have really, over the last 10 years, been tailored to the cloud because they could see that that's where people were going. And so a lot of these environments that from the cloud service providers that have some of these certifications that we take for granted a lot because we can write off of their certifications, you're going to have to go through ISO. You're going to have to go through SOC 2. And I don't think that people really comprehend the level of detail that when you hold these compliance certifications and you're able to offload a lot of the investigative work, a lot of the data that you need to collect, I don't think that a lot of people understand the complexity that goes into what is an ISO audit, how it's a multi-pronged approach. What does a SOC audit look like from a compliance and infrastructure standpoint? How do you make your facilities fit within those models that have really been developed with the idea that you've partnered with a cloud service provider that's taken a lot of this heavy lifting off your plate. But from an automation and a cloud containerization standpoint, what is it going to take for you to rebuild all that? Are you going to build your own cloud service provider? Some companies have the engineering capacity, and there will be some industries where it never makes sense to be fully in the cloud. But for a lot of these smaller companies, we talk about cloud ops as this overarching thing that will fix. I've got the solution that will fix everybody. I don't have a tailored, I take a Bowie knife instead of a scalpel and surgically decide how I'm going to disseminate this message. And you see leaders at these companies go, hey, if Basecamp's moving their stuff back on-prem, why can't I? Well, Basecamp has the engineering staff. You don't. You don't have the ability to rebuild and give operational excellence that your internal customers require, you're going to have a bad time trying to keep it all online and functional. And I think that that's one of the things that really gets messed, especially when it comes to the orchestration behind Kubernetes and infrastructure as code. Sure, you can do it. You've got all the tools that you need to do it. It's a matter of the retooling and the manpower, and where is that money going to be best spent?
Yeah, I think really interesting that you even brought up the big company versus the small company's dilemma and how they're different. Uh, so we
And for too
talked like
long, and I just want to capitalize on that because we've
Mhm,
treated cloud like a one size fits all approach. What works for
mhm,
Microsoft must work for the mom and pop startup that just had a great idea and they're onboarding their product. And we
mhm,
talk about the cloud as this ubiquitous place that everybody fits and everybody's got a place to fit without talking about the surgical approach that you really need to consider when you're looking at moving to not only cloud native, but a hybrid model even.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, yeah, that's true. And
That's why we call
so
it journey.
yeah, and and talking about a journey, I think Spot itself as an organization has been on a journey, and I've had the chance to kind of watch Spot and be involved in a bit in Spot's journey, and so it started out with a lot of focus on Spot instances that replace
Mhm.
these on-demand EC2 kind of instances, and but I think the organization has been through a journey as well, and it's going much beyond that now. Could you talk a bit about that, the journey of Spot and where it started and where it's headed now?
Yeah, so Spot really started with the idea that there was a way to use this excess capacity that the cloud providers had in place,
Hmm.
um, and really and really approach that one size fits all approach to how we do um, this cloud onboarding, right? We can figure out a way to save money and we can throw percentages. I don't like throwing percentages around because mileage may vary for. But on demand instances are expensive. They're the most expensive way to run your infrastructure. And sure, I can go in and within 30 seconds stand up a server, but what is that actual cost implication long term for me and my organization if I just go and run everything on demand? And there's a lot of nuance to cloud computing and the financial aspect of it, right? Like we could make a whole 3 hour episode about how everything fits together from getting a financial commitment, a resource commitment, and partnering with a cloud service provider. But at the other side of it is why would you do that if you don't have to? If you've got a workload like a staging environment, why would you run it on the most expensive way possible? You need an easy way to come in and make your development environment, take for example, cost effective so that you can still do stuff, but not pay for the cost of running a whole separate environment. So if you can use a instance that has a certain percentage off because somebody else didn't need it, then it makes sense to really think about what are we lifting to the cloud. And so we come in from two aspects. We come in from a utilization aspect and say, hey, how can we best fit your workload onto a reserved capacity instance if that's what you want to do? How can we scale your application to fit within what's available within a pricing model that works? But also, how can we shut it down when we don't need it? We don't need it all the time, right? If I'm pushing code and I'm just doing a staging environment, I want to see what it's going to do. I don't need it running over the weekend like I do my core application. And so that's really the problem that we went into and tried to solve for is how do you come in and really adjust your workloads to fit within the amazing amount of excess capacity that's available. And then we built a proprietary AI algorithm that goes in and takes all this data and collates it so that we can go out and find and not only predict the best price, but predict where it's going to be, how long that instance is going to last for, because spot instances, by their definition, are ephemeral. You're going to lose them at some point. But if we can predict an hour and a half in advance and replace that instance on the fly before you even know that it's gone, that makes it viable for not only running on your staging environment and your development workloads, but now you can look at doing production workloads on that because we're replacing them so well in advance before you lose access to that instance. You're saving a lot of money. And a great example like this is a pandemic, right? There were companies where their business was selling things that people do outside, like travel agencies and concert ticket companies, and these companies that suddenly had to find a way to offload a lot of the capacity that they had reserved and the pricing agreements and give them to gaming companies. And so our one of our tools allows you to take that aspect of what can I run on spot? How can I sell off some of my excess capacity and make it so that both of us win? The gaming company that sees an uptick because everybody's locked in at home needs that compute capacity so that people can play video games and interact with each other, and the ticketing company needs to offload it because it's just burning cash. So it's that finding that sweet balance of what do I need and how do I make my application run as smoothly and as reliably as possible, but also how can I do it for the lowest cost and the least barrier to entry that I can come up with, and that's the way to do it. And so that's really what we've built on. And we've expanded that portfolio to say, here's what your storage is doing. We've got some cool security stuff coming down the pipe. We've got some cool stuff that will help really build out that cloud ops as a holistic approach. But that's really what our core is. How can we save you money and manage your financial commitments? And how can we use excess capacity to really optimize our workloads around the cloud operations side?
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I think it's really cool. And, the fact that you can predict when a spot instance is going to get taken back by the cloud vendor and then be able to shift those workloads without any interruption in them. I think that's really, that's really something.
Mhm.
Um, you know, but for a lot of people who are really committed to, they've been committed to the cloud vendors and they probably use a lot of calculators. They do their best and they're focusing on, streamlining their infrastructure, saving costs as much as possible, squeezing every ounce of it out of it. To them who feel like, there's so much available for us to save costs. Do you think, those calculators and those best practices and suggestions that are put out by these cloud vendors, do you think that's enough? If you really do those, if you double down on just doing that really well, do you think that itself is enough to really bring down costs, or you think there's much more than that? That's hardly anything.
So I think that one of the problems with, and we talk about those cloud calculators, and people take them like they're gospel, but they're not really tailored to your environment. They really don't have an idea of where your workload's at. They really don't have an idea of where um, what your operations needs, right? Like you can go in and you can price out a cluster of a Kubernetes, what it would take to run a Kubernetes cluster, but it could also um, just not take into account what your workload actually is. And so I don't think the calculators are bad. I think calculators give you a general idea of where you're going to be and plus or minus 10, 20, 30%. But I think that, of course, they make the best effort, but they can't address every single use case. And there's a reason why when Spot, for instance, comes into an environment and starts working on a workload and onboarding a customer, we do a lot of research and a lot of balancing to figure out what is going to work best for the customer, right? And so I really want to not bag on the vendors, but I want people not to take these calculators and these estimators as gospel and start, oh, this is how much money we're going to save. Let's go. You really need to think about it from a FinOps, from a cloud ops, from a security perspective of what all the, because some of those calculators don't take into the underlying stuff that you need, like your data transfer, right? Data transfer seems really simple. It's free when to put it in, it costs to take it out. But how do you go in and you could spend days and hours sitting there how to figure out what that cost is really going to be, but you won't know until you get that built out and get an idea of what you're actually doing in the cloud.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah. And yeah, related to that, just want to talk about how there's both practice as well as there's the tools that does some of the heavy lifting as well. And I want to
Mhm.
dig into a bit about what's the balance between that. When you're talking about cost savings using Spot, and let's say an organization says, I want to use Spot. Uh, what's it like? How much of it is best implementing best practices? Humans, let's say from the customer organization and from Spot itself, working together to really optimize and change stuff in the infrastructure, the architecture, versus Spot, the tool itself, the product itself, what it does. Could you give us a bit of, talk a bit about what's the balance between those two?
I think it's an equal balance. I think that
Mhm,
you really need to look at your workloads and what you're trying to accomplish. What's your goal at the end of the day, right?
mhm,
Once you have that end result figured out, then you can come in and start looking at the cloud optimization standpoint. But like I
mhm,
said, you really don't have an idea of what your workloads are going to cost and what refactoring you have to go through internally until you get landed onto a cloud provider, right? So half the battle is getting onto the cloud provider, starting to figure it out. FinOps, as the FinOps and the cloud ops idea really take, we started with DevOps, right? So DevOps is the idea of how to rethink how we approach development. FinOps and cloud ops are the same thing. FinOps is how do we rethink the financial aspect of our IT infrastructure, right? FinOps is not just about the cloud. FinOps is about how your IT and your dev organization work together inside of your organization from a financial aspect. Cloud ops is all about the cloud. And so I think that once you get on, then you start working, you get on, you understand where your workload's at, and then you start working with your vendor and your cloud service provider to define what FinOps success looks for you. FinOps success for a company, for companies that I've worked for, looks entirely different because it's our workloads, previous companies I worked for, our workloads were storage heavy and compute light. But there are companies that are going to have strong compute and need tons of compute power, but very minimal storage, or can even go serverless and use serverless and just add that horsepower when they need. So FinOps is very personal. CloudOps is the more generalized. And that's the way that I like to look at it. It's a healthy balance of both. But at the end of the day, your organization's mileage is going to vary based on your end goal and how FinOps looks to you and how CloudOps looks to you. And I think that that's where a lot of people get lost because they're like, yep, I know FinOps. I know how to read a billing statement. I know how to go in and do chargebacks. But if we can automate a good portion of that and help you get the best pricing and help you optimize your infrastructure, you get the best of three worlds all at the same time. So I think that it's a multi-pronged approach, but I think each of those prongs is very specifically tied and aligned to each of the others. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, it does. You know, continuing, I want to ask about, like you said, different organizations, different needs.
Mm-hmm.
One size doesn't fit all. So, there's obviously moving from on-demand to spot instances, which is
Mm-hmm.
a big, huge cost saving itself. Does that work for most organizations? And if that's not an option, then what are some of the other ways that organizations that they can bring down costs even apart from these moving to spot instances?
Well, I think it's bigger than moving just a spot and saying, hey, we're done. I think it comes down to what your organization defines FinOps as,
Hmm.
what the goals financially are, and then, like I said earlier, what is your workload going to be? And you brought up a good point about every company looking different. And sure, you can go in and find $200,000 of compute waste, but what are you going to do with that savings? What are you going to do? And I think that one thing that people lose out on, and because they don't know how to do it because it's complex, and what they aren't able to do because they don't have the level of usage that justifies giving somebody a dedicated account manager until they hit certain thresholds as defined. We can help you go in and set up a reserved instance contract. We can help you go in, and a reserved instance contract just means, for your listeners who are not aligned in the engineering side, the RI contract just means you're committing to using a specific instance type and size and saying, I'm going to use this much and you're going to give me a discount of X% because I'm using this much. But then there are savings plans, right? I'm going to throw a lot of terms out here because I want people to kind of wrap their head around what this all entails. And then there are savings plans. Savings plans are where you say, I'm going to use a lot of compute and I know what family I want to use, but I want to be able to use an X large or a 2X large or a 4X large based on my workloads. And you're going to give me a percentage because I'm committing to you that I'm going to use this specific instance family with this amount of memory, this amount of RAM, and I want to be able to bounce around all the instances across all my accounts. And then there's an EDP where you go in and say, I'm projecting that my business is going to do this much with my cloud service provider this year. And next year, I'm going to increase by this much, and you're going to give me a discount based on that much. There's a lot of complex math that goes into FinOps and figuring out how you're going to handle it. One of the things that people come to me and say is, man, I love how Eco makes it easy for me to understand that and help do that on my behalf. We are the partner that you've never had in the cloud space before because we have these direct relationships with the cloud service providers where we can go help negotiate on your behalf and automate it so that you're not spending 3 days and 2 weeks and a month trying to figure out what your spend strategy is. We can go in and show you using our data and our professional FinOps consultants to come in and help you do that. That's all they do is come in and help you figure that out. And I think that that's the answer to your question is how do you make it work at scale is you use a tool like Spot to come in and really help figure out where you want to land because it's complex and it's hard to get a hold of people and it's hard to get onto the same page as your cloud service provider, because at the end of the day, the CSP is interested in absorbing all your workloads for the most amount of money possible for the longest term commitment possible. And your job as a FinOps or a cloud ops practitioner is to make it so it's the most cost effective, most reliable, and most highly available and secure environment that you can give your company. And I think partnering with, if you're a small mid cap company, and or even a large company, you just want to offload it because you don't want to have somebody dedicated. Coming to a company like Spot and helping and letting us help you do that makes it really easy for you to absorb and grow and really move along in your cloud journey to where you envision yourself being.
All right. Yeah, a lot of terms there. And, I want to just add a tip to listeners as well. If you want to know more about this kind of stuff, reserved instances, on-demand instances, the different pricing models that the cloud vendors have, head over to Spot's website. There's a lot of good content on that stuff. I've read some of that stuff myself. It's pretty helpful, pretty detailed, and they even have some stuff specific to cloud vendor like Azure or AWS. So definitely go check out those resources to know more about these pricing models in the cloud and getting into the details, because a lot of times you can miss out on those details and it really costs you over the long run. So definitely head over there and read some of those resources. Um, so Sean, I want to talk about some of the quick wins that your customers see once they start using Spot. How soon do they see results? What are the kind of results they see? Yeah, tell us a bit about that.
Well, I think the quick wins are you can realistically with the Spot console, and Eco is the product that um, I really think is where a lot of our customers get their start. Eco is our FinOps and cost management product. But from the moment that you turn it on, within 2 to 3 days of ingesting a CUR report, cumulative usage report from your cloud provider, we can start predicting where you can save. We're looking at data that's coming back every 15 seconds from the operations and the performance of your applications and environment. And so I think within the first week, we've seen customers get realized savings and where their cloud spend is going. Does that mean you get a check that day and you can go back and say, look at how much money you saved? No, but it gives you a holistic dashboard that you can use to go back to your management and really give an idea of, hey, this is what we're seeing. This is the trajectory we're on, because we can go out and forecast using the data that we've collected over the last 7 to 8 years of Spot being in existence. The other quick win is, what don't you have? Like, how many volumes do you have that aren't being used, that are just sitting there unattached, costing you 10 cents per gigabyte? How many of them are multi-terabyte volumes, right? If you can do some of that cleanup and have some of those rules, part of the Spot portfolio that we really set aside as our own, as a separate brand, right? We don't really think about it as being part of the Spot family, even though they are, is Cloud Checker. And Cloud Checker allows you to come in and set some of these automated usage reports. Hey, tell me if I've got any volumes that haven't been used in 30, 45, 60 days. Tell me where that spend is going and help me recapture it by deleting the volume, creating a snapshot, offloading it. But show me these resources that are being wasted. And our products are built in a way that we look at waste and try to avoid it as much as possible. And so we start with the lowest hanging fruit of going in and finding servers that have been severely underutilized, finding storage that's been unattached, finding a lot IP addresses that you've allocated that you're not using, finding things that you can really go in and start getting rid of, and keep a running checklist and fire off an alert if it violates a rule. I think that's a really cool thing that I think gets missed out a lot when you look at the bigger picture of what Spot and the Cloud Checker products do.
Yeah, and so it starts with cost cutting, and then you have this bunch of budget that you save. But then the next thing is, do you just keep it, or do you rechannel it into something better, more strategic? Could you give us some examples of how organizations do more with that saved budget, and what are the possibilities?
Yeah, so I mean, so from a cloud ops perspective, there are two ways to look at it. One is, I've saved a bunch of money in my cloud environment. What can I redirect that money to be used for? Is it R&D? Is it trying to figure out how to do something on a different service? And so one of the things that the cloud providers appreciate is that, yeah, we help clean up some of these underutilized resources that they'd love to keep billing you for, but we can redirect that into other services that they find that they really want to promote. Right. So I've got a bunch of EC2 instances that I love doing. Well, maybe it's time to start looking at Lambda. And so you start going and spending more on Lambda, or you start spending more on the Azure Kubernetes service because you had a lot of Azure VMs that weren't running, or you spent a lot of time and effort with blob storage and S3 because you wanted to get rid of a lot of the EBS volumes that you really had on infrequent access, but really wanted to have available but tiered. And so you go in and explore tiering on your blob storage and your S3 storage. And so I think that that's one way to cut costs and redirect that budget. But I think the other is internal development. What are we wanting to do long term with our product? Well, now you've freed up some of your budget, so now you can go explore other technologies and figure out what's the best way to add some observability. How can we refactor our code to make it more efficient? Sure, it'll cost a little bit more upfront, but now that we've got all this savings, now that we've got savings in hand that we can say, let's keep that in the cloud budget, but redirect how we're going to utilize it and really advance our product to the idea of what we can do more and better of to make our product that leader where we want it to be. And I
Mm,
use the royal hour, right? Your product, the listener's product, not the spot product.
okay. Yeah. Also want to touch on this thing about being able to kind of better track cloud expenses,
Mhm.
because a lot of times it's just you spend a bunch of money on cloud and you don't know uh, you know uh, which projects really need more versus which projects are really draining budget without really being worth it. Does Spot help with that? Just being able to track spend better even.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that Eco, our FinOps product does is really allow you to make that chargeback easily. And I'm going to use a personal
Mm,
example here. When I started at a company um, that was moving into the cloud, and I helped migrate them into the cloud and get their cloud operations going. One of the things that I had to do every month was spend a day figuring out how to charge back usage to specific departments. And that was a whole day of my time at my salary. Well, you add that up, and that's 12. And so that's 12 days a year that I could be doing something else. And sometimes it was more than 12 days because you have to go track down the owners, figure out what they were doing and how they wanted to split it out internally. So what I originally had as a 1 day thing could turn into two, could turn into three, could turn into a question a week later. So now more and more of my salary as an engineering leader and thought and architect is being used to figure out billing things. Well, as the cloud has progressed, I figured out, hey, I could use tags, and that would help keep track of it, but I still had to keep track of my tags. A tool like Eco allows me to use those tags and use chargeback rules to go in and say, no, that's how we're charging it back. This is going to R&D. This is going to HR. This is going to accounting. These are what these different departments are paying for, and that's built into our product. And that's it. My rule of thumb has always been if it takes me more than 15 minutes, figure out how to automate it. And I wish I would have figured out this special sauce on how to automate chargebacks because I could have done something cool. But Spot makes it so easy to come in, set it up, insert your tags and kind of set up your workflows and then allow you to do those chargebacks without you having to think about them because it just is reading your bill constantly. Because we're getting real-time updates to your billing dashboard, just like your Cur or your other billing tools are. But we allow you to have those rules in to go and do that chargeback. And so, yes, we totally help with that. And I think that's one thing that really gets people looking into the broader portfolio is we make it so easy that now you can really start looking at more complex setups and cloud environments because we make the chargeback process so easy.
mhm. Well, that's really cool. And so a lot of focus is definitely on FinOps and just more conscious cloud spending. Um, the Spot also offers solutions around just making Kubernetes simpler, because there's definitely talk about how there's a need for Kubernetes to be less complex and more easy for teams to really get started with and even manage as it scales. Does Spot help with any of that?
Oh, for sure. And so we have a number of products. We have Spot Ocean. Spot Ocean is kind of our containerization and cloud ops specific tool. And it works for Kubernetes. It works for Apache Spark. It works. We have a CI/CD pipeline tool that allows you to do rapid deployments. Um, but Ocean, at its core, what it does is it looks at your infrastructure. It looks at all the pods running on your nodes. It looks at all the different aspects of your application. And every 5 to 30 seconds, we're getting real-time feedback on the performance of your application. And what we can do is we can go and say, yeah, you're using this pod, but your application is memory intensive, and you're using a lot of compute instances that are processor heavy instead of memory heavy. So you've got a whole bunch of instances you've scaled out. Well, if you switch to a memory optimized instance and you make it a little bit bigger, we can get more pods onto that same application. And we call this bin packing, where you can go in and take those pods and we take the peaks and valleys out of the performance of your application and really smooth that demand curve out so that you're using the right instances with the right overhead and so that you're getting the best bang for your processor dollar and your memory dollar and your storage dollar. And we work with Kubernetes. We work with all the major cloud providers in their Kubernetes environments, but we also work with Apache Spark and do the same thing. And then our CI/CD tool allows you to launch that optimized infrastructure from your CI/CD pipeline and do canary deployments, something that a lot of companies have wanted to do and do those blue, green, and canary deployments and do rapid releases of their code. This tool does that, but does it with optimized infrastructure at the core as well. And so we do have that. And one of the things that we hear is from a lot of companies that don't have whole dedicated Kubernetes teams, or even if they do, this makes it so easy because we're taking into not only the cost, right? Because cost is a big aspect of it, but we're taking the actual performance of your application and going out and finding the best value, the best size, the best alignment for your pods on your cluster and making sure that we do it for the way that meets all of your financial needs rules.
Wow, that's really cool. And winding down, one of the last questions is just that Spot really has an ocean of solutions. There's so many. You mentioned Echo, Cloud Checker, Ocean itself. So where do you suggest that listeners who are interested in checking out Spot and what it can do for them, where do they start? Because there's so much that's possible. Where do they start?
Yeah, and it can be really overwhelming when you look at that Spot
Mhm.
website for the first time and say, holy crap, what product do I need to start with? Right?
Mhm.
And so we have a lot of products, and so I'm gonna name them off, and I'm gonna tell you where you should start. And everybody should start with Eco because Eco is really easy to
Okay.
onboard. It's really easy to get going. But you can look at our Cloud Checker product for compliance and making sure that you're keeping track of your SOC 2, your ISO workflows, all the different compliance and GRC aspects to the compliance that you have to have. That's what Cloud Checker's for. We have
Mhm.
InstaCluster, which does relational database as a service, where you come in and we help you manage the back end of your relational database. You don't need to have a DBA on call because you can come into us and do it as a service. And then we have the Ocean portfolio and Elastigroup for your stateful workloads. Elastigroup allows you to go in and run your traditional server client infrastructure in a way that makes sense with a lot of automation behind the scenes to ensure, again, the best price, but doing it for your traditional server infrastructure. And then the Ocean product line for your containers. And then there's some cool stuff, like I said, coming down with security, coming down with API integrations with Spot Connect. We're starting to look at. And so there's a myriad of different tools, but I recommend everybody start with Eco because one thing that you can do is get the 30-day free trial through the cloud marketplaces and go in and really get an idea of what you can save from day one and make it so that you can go and really put together that FinOps strategy that we're looking at as we head into the calendar year 2023 and the economic headwinds that I think we're still not entirely sure how they're going to affect us, but make it so that you can have an idea of what your cloud journey is going to look like over the next 12, 18, 24 months.
Okay, that's awesome. That's very actionable. Check out Echo to start with. And I want to ask about just how pricing works for Spot. Yeah, how's it structured, the pricing itself, how does it scale?
Eco and Ocean are based on a percentage of your savings, right?
Oh,
So,
okay.
for example, if you're spending $100 and we save you 30, you pay us a percentage of that $30 that you save. Um, every single pricing structure, if you go and you sign up at the marketplaces, I think our default is 28%. If for every $100 that you save, you pay us $28. That's the easiest way to look at it. We do custom pricing for the other products. I can't talk about what the pricing for some of the other products are, but for as a baseline, it's a percentage of the savings that you get after you get the savings. So you get the savings in December, you pay us in January, right? And if you sign up through the hyperscalers marketplaces, so we're in the Azure, AWS, and we're working on GCP right now, marketplaces, you would just go sign up, and it's part of your bill, and it's part of that economic workflow that happens when your bill posts. If if you contact us or you reach out to us through the website or you find and we get you an account rep, then we can start talking about custom pricing and negotiations just like any other product. But for the rule of thumb is figure 20 to 28% of the savings that you get will be paid back to Spot. So it makes it really easy where you don't have to do it. The one thing that we do have is 1 year terms, right? If you sign up, it's a 1 year term. Um, and there's a myriad of different ways to handle that, but that's the rule of thumb, percentage of savings.
Oh, it's really cool. In essence, you could say it's actually free to use,
Mhm.
Spot because, it's going
Right,
to
and
cut your bill.
it's such a low barrier to entry that if I go and set it up and I get that free 30 days and can have an idea of what it's going to be savings wise and show that we can really get some actionable data, yeah, I'd pay for that in a heartbeat. There are a
Yeah,
lot of tools that cloud customers use that don't give the value that Eco and the Spot by NetApp product line give that would replace so many of your tools that you've bought that you're not really using to their full capacity, but you're still paying for. So why not look at what Spot can bring you and how we've tried to integrate it all together and make it really easy with that one pane of glass that I think really gets overlooked from a complexity standpoint.
mhm, mhm. So, are there any limitations on where you can run Spot? Let's say you're on Red Hat, or let's say you have on-premise infrastructure. Are there any limitations on where you can run Spot?
Yeah, so we're cloud native, so we really don't have an on-prem. But if you're moving your Red Hat OpenShift workloads to a cloud provider, guess what? We support OpenShift. We support Apache Spark, so we support a myriad of tools coming to the cloud from your on-prem environment, but we really don't have any on-prem stuff, but we really make it an effort to integrate with as many of the services that people need as possible. That's why we have Ocean for Spark. That's why we have um, the OpenShift integration, right? Because there are people who need to move those workloads that aren't ready to go and say, I'm going to kick OpenShift to the curb and just move to all Kubernetes. And I want to stay with what I'm used to. And so we've really made an effort to make our product portfolio, while cloud native, work with the tools that you need in your cloud journey.
Mhm. All right, really cool. So we've come to the end of the questions on Spot and just the cool things that Spot is doing in the
Yep.
space. So for our listeners, there really is no reason to not check out Spot because, like Sean said, you don't pay separately for Spot. It's just a percentage of what you save from what you're already spending. So you're going to spend less, and you won't even feel that you're paying for another tool. So definitely head over to Spot, check out all of their tools and solutions. And like Sean said, start with Echo. And I guess that's the quickest way to see results. So definitely, give this a try. And I think it's really cool what Spot is doing. So
And
with
I
that,
just
we
want to
want
add one more thing. I just want to add one
to.
more thing. If your listeners run into problems with onboarding or checking out the products, our support SLA is 2 minutes via the chat window. So
Wow.
we make our support experience very easy, and if you get stuck and you can pop up a chat bubble, and within 2 minutes is our SLA for customers who need support. And we are more than well, even during the 30-day free trial, we are more than willing to help get you onboarded to make your success with this product, your listener success to this to this product is what helps us grow. And so we are very invested and we are very proactive in making sure that your support experience is just as seamless as the rest of our products.
Yeah, that's awesome. Wow, 2 minutes. That's really short. That's really quick support.
Mhm.
And yeah, and it's great to know that there's a team to help you on get on board, get used to the product, and just figure out what you need to be doing along the way. So you're not on your own.
Mhm.
So I think there's definitely a lot of reasons to really go check out Spot. So if you have even an inkling that you're probably overspending on cloud, and you might want to cut some of that spend, especially considering the things happening in the economy today. Definitely head over there. I think Spot is the place to be today. So thanks, Sean, for that overview. Before you go, Sean, just a couple of questions to get to know you a bit.
Sure.
Um, so here goes. So your alternate career, if not for your job in tech.
Oh man. Oh, I'd probably be a backcountry hiking, camping river guide. Like I'd be working outside. Um,
Okay.
I did forest firefighting when I was a lot younger during my first role in college, and I really loved being outside. I probably wouldn't go back to firefighting, but I would probably go back and be an outdoor explorer or guidesman and taking people on backcountry trips.
Okay. Okay. Wow. So the background picture says it all. Do you have a story from that photo itself? Is it something you took? Is there a story?
Yeah, so this is a picture I took and heavily modified. It's of the Grand Teton National Park, which is one of my favorite places. It's right next to Yellowstone National Park, for those of you who are curious where Grand Tetons are. Um, but it's just a picture that I took. I really love the mount. I love being in the mountains. I love being outside, and I love taking pictures and then playing with them in Photoshop. So that's really a picture that I took during a camping trip a few years ago.
Yeah, really cool. It definitely looks very professional, like one of the backgrounds you'd see on Zoom or these other places. Really cool.
Thank you.
Um, I kind of guess maybe this could be one of the second question could be already from your first question teeing off. So, one hobby or interest that you picked up during the pandemic?
Gardening,
Oh,
growing a
okay.
garden.
Okay.
See, I threw you for a loop. My my yeah, gardening. Going in
Okay.
and learning how seeds grow, learning putting together a garden and just learning about it. Another one that I picked up during the pandemic was I started playing with code more. We were all locked up, and but gardening's probably the fun one because I love being outside.
Okay. So, which plant are you most proud of that you grew?
Hmm. Tomatoes and peppers. Those are my go-to. Cucumbers are
Okay.
good, but tomatoes and sweet and hot peppers are kind of my favorite. Those are the
Okay.
ones that gross. That's I seem to have a lot, and garlic. Growing garlic from seed is really kind of cool because it's a little
Wow.
bit different and it takes a lot longer to grow. But when you get your own garlic, sure you can go get a jar of garlic at the store, but there's something about that taste and smell of fresh garden grown garlic that I just love.
Yeah, I'm sure that's something. I mean, something that you grew yourself. There's something special about that.
Hmm.
So your job now is developer relations. I want to ask. So you wear multiple hats on the role. Which resonates most with you? Do you see yourself most as a developer, as a marketer, as a product guy, as a teacher, or something else?
You know, when people ask what I do and I have to say developer relations lead, I get a lot of quizzical looks like, what does that mean? Right? Because you're right, there are so many hats that sit in the developer relations spot. I call myself a software engineer because I feel
Okay.
like engineering is, people talk about software engineer and we hold it with the reverence as we should because there are people that are very great product people and developers. I'm a software engineer because I engineer the hell out of software. I figure out how to stick it into an environment. I figure out how it works. I figure out, I have to figure out the message that I'm selling it with. I have to teach practitioners how to use my tools. I do a lot of talks about getting the best value, like what we've been talking about here, right? Like How do I make cloud ops fit into a 1 hour session? Well, there's a lot that goes into it. And so I call myself a software engineer, and that's kind of how I describe it because I'm constantly engineering the messaging, the usage, and teaching people how to use that software. And I think it just kind of wraps everything up. Developer relations is important because a lot of my job is talking to practitioners in a way without making them feel like they're being sold to. But it's also advocating and engineering how they would put our products into their specific environment and helping and being that co-engineer that they can lean on. So engineers from the one list that you gave me, yes, I fit all of those. But teacher is probably the one that I would go with out of all of it because so much of my job is communicating and teaching and advocating.
Wow, really interesting. A lot of surprises in your responses. That's really cool, though. One software tool or product that you think is very elegantly built.
Oh, the controversial question. Um, I, from an elegantly built perspective, I think, and this is going to sound self-serving, I think the way that we've built out the Spot product line and the portal is so elegant and so easy to figure out that that's one answer. But the other answer is Mac OS because I
All
think
right.
that so much, I think that so, and we can have our discussions about which is better, Mac or Windows or Android. But I think that the way that Apple approaches Mac OS development and the way that they tailor the releases and the way that they focus on the user experience, sure, it's frustrating sometimes. And I have my own problems with Apple and how they do like endpoint management for an enterprise. But I think just if we're talking about just elegantly built, I think that Apple figured out how to make Linux and Unix based operating systems cool and get it out into the marketplace in a way that I don't think anybody thought would be possible back in 2000, 2001 when it was X Windows and whatever frame or windowing system that you like to use. If it was, I can't even remember them now, but I think that the way that they've built and evolved Mac OS 10 and Mac OS is really cool.
Yeah, I definitely, agree with that. And on the other side, the story is totally the opposite. I mean, with Windows, it's just so many botched attempts at
Right.
really revamping it.
Problem when you're engineering, right? I think that you get too many irons in the fire, but really, and Windows, and they're starting to come around with Windows 11. And again, we can debate which operating system you like more, but just from a usability perspective, I think that people have seen what Apple has done with Mac OS and really said we need to get our stuff together and figure out how we can be that elegant and seamless with our digital lives.
Yeah, yeah. The last question, your
Mhm.
favorite source to find out what's new and happening in tech, where do you go?
So for source, do you mean like website? Like what websites do I use? Or do you mean like what people and thought leaders do I use? Or just
Yeah, I
in
mean,
general?
it could be either. Some people mention a website, some mention a group that they have, or yeah, contact.
So there are two. I use Twitter a lot, and a lot of the people that I find on Twitter are thought leaders in the cloud ops, cloud security, Kubernetes space. And
Mhm.
watching the chatter that goes across Twitter, and we can debate until the cows come home about where Twitter has been and where it's going. But I think from a community standpoint, Twitter has changed the game on how we find information in snippets that we can consume easily and really end up down rabbit holes on. But I also think that LinkedIn is starting to really take off from a tech perspective space. I see a lot of cool takes
Mhm.
about the tech industry and a lot of references in a longer form that you can't really do on a microsite like Twitter. But I think
Mhm.
LinkedIn and Twitter are the two places that I get a lot of my content from. And then I listen podcasts. I love throwing on a podcast and just listening to it while I work and
Mhm.
ending up going down a rabbit hole 2 hours later because I heard something on the podcast. And so those are
Mhm.
probably my three sources: Twitter, LinkedIn, and podcasts.
Yeah. How do you cut through the noise with Twitter and LinkedIn? Because there's definitely a lot, and once you log in, there's just so much distraction, right? How do you actually cut through all of that and focus on what you really
Yeah.
need?
So I build lists. My way
Mhm.
of managing Twitter is building lists with thought leaders. And then I can filter those lists so I can just watch and TweetDeck and other previous API clients in the Twitter
Mhm.
platform were really good at coalescing all that data and putting it in one pane. So
Mhm.
I could just watch that traffic. You can still
Mhm.
do it with TweetDeck and the list. LinkedIn is really just self curation. You just have to really go train the algorithm what you want to see, and eventually it starts popping up. Like if you start hiding things that don't really apply to you,
Mhm.
it starts to pick up on that and kind of what your
Uh,
preferences are.
yeah.
Another good one that I really want to throw out there is TikTok. And TikTok, again,
Okay.
controversial. I realize that people have different thoughts about TikTok, but and maybe YouTube Shorts is going to be the way that we get around some of the geopolitical issues with TikTok. But
Mhm.
some of the best content and some of the best topics that have been the most fruitful for me is going and watching a 30-second to 2-minute video about a concept and then ending up and digging on it more. And there's a lot of great content creators that are in the tech scene on TikTok
Wow.
that are really using YouTube and TikTok and Instagram Reels as a way to get the message out about some of these complex topics. Like I saw one guy do a 2-minute thing on subnetting that turned into a 30-minute video about subnetting that was really cool and helped me rethink the way that I come up with subnets. And so it's not always topical to the cloud, but it helps me rethink about things that I've been doing for 20 years in a different way, if that makes sense.
Well,
And so I think that that short, bite-sized content is the way to get it. But yeah, tuning your feeds is really important in getting through the signal through the noise.
wow. That really blows my mind because I never thought of that possibility with TikTok and YouTube Shorts. So I definitely want to explore that more. Shon, just really kudos for these last few responses. You really, surprised me with each one of them. So yeah, it was a lot of fun chatting. Thanks so much for just sharing all of the things that Spot is up to, and even just giving us some really cool responses about just you and your interests as well. Really enjoyed the
Fantastic.
conversation.
No, it was great. Thank you so much. And if any of your listeners need to get a hold of me, they can just put my first name and last name with a dot in the middle together at netapp.com, and I'd be more than happy to find what you need or work with you individually to help you get to where your cloud journey is taking you.
Yeah, awesome. And Sean's first name is spelled Shon.
Hmm.
Um, so that's pretty much it. Listeners, viewers, thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope you really enjoyed this conversation with Shon. Definitely stay tuned, subscribe so you can get more of this stuff. Head to amazic.com and catch up on all of our previous podcast episodes as well. We love doing this and bringing this to you guys, and we hope you're finding a lot of value in this. So thank you so much. And with that, it's Shon and myself signing off for today. Thank you.
Thank you.